So here are I think the two big questions that I have. One is, where does your concept of the good come from, and why is it universal? And two, you just spelled out sort of your differentiation from the sociobiological explanation for morality, that we evolved over time and that our brains are evolved to perform certain tasks, and we sort of naturally came to a level of morality. But you're not a believer in free will. So when you talk about reason and you talk about the importance of reason, you and I fully agree on this. But my question is that, as a neuroscientist, if we are just pure material and we're just a bunch of neurons firing outside of our own control, obviously, because every effect has a cause. If it's just things happening, then why should we value reason? Does it matter that we value reason? Because we can't control whether we value reason anyway. Are these conversations kind of pointless? Because and then back to the first question, how exactly does reason play into the good? Is that just a vague term for a particular system of neurons that convinces another particular set of neurons?
Right. So two questions there. What is the foundation of value and morality specifically, and how does free will or its absence interact here? So the foundation for me is, and this connects to other questions where our intuitions probably divide. I mean, the questions about, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Those are questions that people ask, where religious people, by and large, feel like you need an answer. Like there's a meaning-shaped hole in the world, and we should fill it. And I, given how I view things, think it's the wrong question. I mean, what I see us as having is an opportunity. We are in a circumstance where, based on the minds we have, there's a range of possible experience. And and the horizon goes in both directions, to the very, very bad and the very, very good. And we don't quite know how bad things can get, but based on what we know, we know they can get far worse than we ever want to touch. And so it is with the good. We don't know how good things can get. And yet we know the general direction where we want to head. So we know that if the world becomes more and more characterized by love and joy and creativity and compassion and insight and fun, and we know that's all, that whole suite of and you could list those characteristics as long as you want, but there's a kind of jewel with 1,000 facets that we want more of as conscious entities, and there's a far darker jewel with as many facets that we want far less of. And this spectrum admits of seeming paradoxes, which we could both point to occasions where suffering has led to something good, right? There's a silver lining to certain kinds of pain, right? Or if you want to become a Navy SEAL and experience all the empowerment that comes with that, you have to go through the hell of becoming a Navy SEAL, and that's a test and a trial, and yet there's a massive silver lining for people who come out the other side of that. So, and yet, if you could sample a person's experience in each moment through that ordeal, it might be indistinguishable from torture, right? So that's just to say that the frame around which we put certain sensory experiences matters, right? If I tell you that, the pain in your bicep is because you've been lifting weights so much and you're making so much progress, you'll feel one way about it. If I said to an identical pain, well, you actually unfortunately have arm cancer. It's a very rare cancer, but you've got it, right? You would feel the suffering attendant to that. So, but all of these are all statements about what it's like to have a human mind. And again, I view us as having a navigation problem. And the reason why I feel like there's a foundational claim here that need not even be argued for, that is far more defensible than a claim about revelation or anything else where you might try to anchor morality, is that all I need is the acknowledgement that if we imagine a universe where every conscious mind suffers as much as it can for as long as it can, with nothing good ever coming of it, there's no silver lining. So we have a perfect hell that has been designed for every possible conscious mind, right? I call that the worst possible misery for everyone, right? That's bad. If the word bad is going to mean anything, it applies there, right? Now, if you're going to say it doesn't apply there, if you're going to say, well, yeah, that's kind of bad, but there are things that are worse, I don't know what you're talking about. Because by definition, this is the worst possible misery for everyone, right? So as long as you are going to acknowledge that other states of the universe are better than that, right? Then you've given me my continuum of better and worse.
You're making a very St. Anselm ontological argument here about the nature of bad, and I'm not sure that.
No.
If you can imagine the worst island that you could possibly imagine, then
no, it's very different from that, because it's not to say that because that's clearly specious. If I said to you, well, there's a perfect turtle. Right. I mean,
I agree with you. I'm not defending the ontological argument. I'm making the argument that you're sort of making an ontological argument.
It's not. It may sound that way, but it's not. It's so rudimentary.
Because I think that you're failing to define a couple of terms, meaning that.
Like what?
So when you say the worst possible suffering, do you mean physical suffering? Do you mean mental suffering? And the truth is
any combination that's the worst combined suffering.
But people willingly choose suffering.
It's all mental. It's all mental in the end. But it's all a matter of consciousness and its content.
Right. And I think I feel like you're playing a little bit of a trick when you sort of presuppose that we share a common definition of suffering. I think there's certain things where we share a definition.
Let's say we don't, but so let's say we have a helmet we can put on and dial in every possible conscious state for a human brain, right?
Okay.
So you can wear the helmet and I can wear the helmet, and we each tune it to state, X551, right?
Right.
And I say, well, how do you like that? So one thing that is implicit here, although it's not a defeater if it's not so, but I have an expectation that you and I will converge, perhaps not on every specific state as our favorite or our least favorite, but there'll be whole families of states there that you and I will acknowledge. Well, these are all fantastic. Maybe I'm not sure which I like better than the other, but this is really good. I'd like to feel more of this. And we'll converge. And this is just based on the similarity. I mean,
so how do you not end up, if you're pursuing the ultimate, if there is such a thing as the ultimate possible good, and this good is what you are, how do you not end up, number one, in sort of the brave new world? You're drugging yourself the whole time for pleasure.
That's an interesting question.
And number two, this does bring to mind an essay by George Orwell that he wrote in 1940 about the rise of Nazism. And what he basically suggested was, why is it that everything is so good in the West? Like everything is much better in Britain than it is in Germany, and yet people are willingly joining up with this monster to go and fight. And he said, because it turns out that a lot of people don't want freedom, a lot of people don't want pleasure, a lot of people are willing to forego those things in favor of a higher pursuit. And you see that now with literally billions of people who, I think that the Bush line that every human soul yearns for freedom, I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of people who misdefine freedom or think that freedom is something that freedom is not. Otherwise, they wouldn't willingly convert into these systems. So I think that it is a little simple.
No, but none of this contradicts the picture I'm painting. It's just that all of these things, all of these differences among people will have explanations, and we don't yet have those explanations in hand. But so take the simplest case. You and I each put our hand on a hot stove. Right now, given our similarity neurologically, I would expect if the stove is hot enough, you and I will have indistinguishable responses, right? And if you don't, if one of us doesn't have that response, there's something wrong with our nervous system. So, but let's just say we met somebody who had a different enough response that we even couldn't converge on the question of, hot stoves are, not worth touching, right? You have a masochist who likes a certain kind of pain that you and I find intolerable. Now, there's an explanation for that difference between us. Now, it might be an explanation that we would have some insight into. Maybe this person has trained himself to feel this, and he just gets this massive, opiate rush for, it's like, in Lawrence of Arabia, Lawrence, apparently that's a true story about him. But that's, you can train yourself to feel a different way about certain kinds of classically unpleasant stimuli. But again, all of this fits in a complete picture that we don't yet have about just why it is certain minds are the way they are. So the macro question for me is, given all the minds as they are, where should we want to go, both individually and collectively? And there may be multiple right answers to this. It's not that there's just one sort of life that is the best possible life. There's a range of different lives that, given 1 million years to talk about it, we might not be able to distinguish which is better or worse. Like is Chinese food better than Thai food, right? Like there's a range of differences there which don't matter for better or worse. It's just different, right? And yet at the end of the day, if you really preferred one and I really preferred the other, we could find some reason why that's the case. I mean, well, you might be a super taster of certain tastes on your, genetically. But then it's still coherent to ask, should we, like, if we could really intrude in the brain and change our intuitions about better and worse, right? If I could change your sense of the rightness of certain actions or the wrongness, we could make this we could ask this additional question of whether that would be good. Because that would be a new way of navigating in the space. And this brings you to your Brave New World question. So, like, if it's possible to, now let's say we had a cure for sadness, right? This is an example I've used before, where we have a pill that perfectly cancels the feeling of grief, say. So at what point after the death of a loved one would you want to take this pill, right? And the answer might be never, and you would have a reason why that was the case. But you could imagine someone who's just so destroyed by the experience of grief that they just can't get their life back on track. Everyone in their life is worried about them. They're, on the verge of suicide. At a certain point, you'd say, well, let's just give you this pill and just see if we can bring a little daylight in there, even if you were against using it for yourself,
sure.
right? But presumably, you wouldn't want to take it 30 seconds after your kid was run over by a bus. You just see the worst thing that's ever happened in your life happen, and then you just pop this pill and you don't feel anything, one way or the other about it, right? You're ready to go to Starbucks, right? That would be a complete fragmentation of who you are with respect to the love you feel or felt for your child, right? Like, what does loving your child mean if immediately upon his or her death, you want to cancel your grief and you feel great, right? So we don't know it'd be hard to find the right answer, but and this kind of thing is very likely coming, by the way, right? It's very likely we will one day have a cure for grief, right? And we'll have to figure out how to use it, and there will be wrong ways to use it. But I think what we want, I think the intuition that causes you to ask this question about Aldous Huxley and Brave New World is that we're right to want to be anchored to reality in some sense, and if we were ever faced with an opportunity of just uploading ourselves into a simulation where just the world is a video game and nothing is real, right? So like that our states of happiness are totally divorced from the reality of our lives, right? And our actual relationships and the conscious experience of other people, that would be a bad thing, right? And yet we could imagine a circumstance of maximizing pleasure in a way that's divorced from reality. And that's an interesting argument to have ethically, because I think our intuitions about that could change to some degree. And I think that there are ways in which we're already in something very much like a simulation that's not, to talk about what is real in this context is interesting. But I share your bias here. I share the sense that there are versions of pure pleasure, Brave New World futures where everyone's a heroin addict, perfectly medicated. That's not good, right? And I think you can adjudicate that based on other possible experiences in the landscape of all possible experiences that are clearly better. And you would make an argument based on evaluating those experiences.
Okay.